The Prime Minister says he's concerned in the wake of the damning report into the BBC's Panorama interview with Princess Diana. After Prince William voiced his anger at the way his mother was deceived, Boris Johnson expressed sympathy.
I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family, and I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
It comes as Prince Harry speaks in a documentary about the impact his mother's death had on his behaviour in later life.
OK, I wasn't drinking Monday to Friday, but I would probably drink a week's worth in one day on a Friday or a Saturday night.
We'll be asking where the Panorama crisis now leaves the BBC. Also tonight. As a ceasefire comes into effect between Israel and Hamas, we have a special report from Gaza. Spain says UK travellers can go there from Monday without a COVID PCR test, but it's still on the amber list here. The world's richest nations agree tougher targets to help limit climate change. And it's Lurex and Lycra galore as performers rehearse for tomorrow's Eurovision Song Contest in Rotterdam.
And coming up in the sport on the BBC News Channel, rolling back the years, Phil Mickelson goes in search of his first major title since 2013 at the US PGA.
Good evening. The Prime Minister has expressed his concern in the wake of Lord Dyson's highly critical report into the BBC's Panorama interview with Princess Diana in 1995. An inquiry found that the BBC covered up deceitful behaviour used by the journalist Martin Bashir to secure his world-exclusive interview. Last night, Prince William launched a scathing attack on the BBC, saying it had let his mother, his family and the public down. Today, Boris Johnson said he hoped the BBC would take steps to ensure that nothing like that ever happened again. This report from our royal correspondent Nicholas Witchell contains some flash photography.
Failed by a rogue reporter and, he feels, by the leaders of a national institution, the BBC. Prince William was getting on with royal duties today, while his excoriation of the BBC rang through the corporation's corridors. The fact is that pretty much from the moment the Panorama interview with his mother was screened in November 1995, William, who was then aged 13, has suspected that his mother was deceived into doing it by the Panorama reporter Martin Bashir. The choice and intensity of William's words last night was devastating.
It is my view that the deceitful way the interview was obtained substantially influenced what my mother said. The interview was a major contribution to making my parents' relationship worse and has since hurt countless others. It brings indescribable sadness to know that the BBC's failures contributed significantly to her fear, paranoia and isolation that I remember from those final years with her.
The BBC is facing tough questions. This was the Prime Minister on a visit to the HMS Queen Elizabeth.
Well, I am obviously concerned by the findings of Lord Dyson's report. I'm very grateful to him for what he's done. I can only imagine the feelings of the royal family, and I hope very much that the BBC will be taking every possible step to make sure that nothing like this ever happens again.
Eton College, the 6th of September 1995. 12 days before Diana had her first meeting with Martin Bashir, at which he produced bogus documents and made far-fetched claims. Before that meeting, the family unit was still functioning. According to William last night, the Panorama interview caused a sharp deterioration in his parents' relationship. This is how the troubled decade of the 1990s unfolded for Charles and Diana. In June 1992, the book Diana, Her True Story had been published. It later emerged Diana had cooperated closely with the author. In December 1992, it was announced that the couple were to separate. In June 1994, Prince Charles gave an interview to ITV in which he admitted to adultery. By mid-1995, Diana was actively considering doing an interview for the BBC's Panorama programme. It was in November 1995 that Martin Bashir, after weeks of secret contact with Diana, conducted the interview. A few weeks later, in December 1995, the Queen gave permission for the couple to seek a divorce. In August 1997, Diana died in a car crash in Paris. In his written statement last night, Prince Harry said the media's culture of exploitation and unethical practices had ultimately killed his mother. Harry continues to be open about his own mental health, issues which have their roots in the events of the 90s. In a new series for a US-based TV company, he describes the effect it all had on him.
I was willing to drink, I was willing to take drugs, I was willing to try and do the things that made me feel less like I was feeling. But I slowly became aware that, okay, I wasn't drinking Monday to Friday, but I would probably drink a week's worth in one day on a Friday or a Saturday night.
Panorama
At the time, it was hailed as the scoop of the decade. More than 25 years later, we finally know the truth about an unscrupulous reporter and at times vulnerable woman, and the hurt that is still very real. Nicholas Witchell, BBC News.
Well, the Metropolitan Police have said they will look again at the contents of Lord Dyson's report to ensure there is no significant new evidence after previously deciding not to begin a criminal investigation. The BBC has said it has made fundamental changes in governance since the 1990s. Here's our home editor, Mark Easton.
This is a crisis that goes to the heart of the BBC's DNA, the values of integrity and fairness that underpin its reputation around the world. The deceit may go back a quarter of a century, but there are unanswered questions that carry huge jeopardy for the corporation today. Does the scandal show the BBC covering up its failings and mistreating innocent whistleblowers? The graphic designer who was commissioned by Martin Bashir to create mocked-up bank statements has long claimed he was made the scapegoat for the scandal.
I would like to speak to Tim Davey, the now Director General, in person, exactly about that. Why to this day it looks like the important people are being covered up.
Panorama staff also tried to blow the whistle on Mr Bashir's unethical behaviour. Although a new policy has been introduced, one producer says raising the matter at the time cost him his job.
I brought the documents to the attention of the BBC management, as I was asked to do by a BBC lawyer, and was told within 24 hours of doing that effectively I would no longer be part of the programme. I had been disloyal. That's what happened to whistleblowers at that time at the BBC.
There's also the question of why the BBC rehired Martin Bashir in 2016 as religious affairs correspondent. James Harding was the director of BBC News at the time and says he takes full responsibility for the mistaken decision to re-employ him. Did you know that he'd forged bank statements?
To answer your question, I didn't know. And in fact, if I had known, of course he wouldn't have got the job. And I can't help feeling that the fact that he was hired back in 2016 has made things more difficult for everyone, so I'm sorry that he was.
The BBC says it rehired Martin Bashir after a competitive interview process. We now, of course, have the Dyson report. We didn't have it then, a statement says. What we do know is that in 2017, the then Director General, Tony Hall, promoted Martin Bashir to religion editor, even though he knew all about the fake documents.
I want to ensure that when we do make mistakes, they are caused by trying to serve our viewers, not by looking after ourselves.
That was Lord Hall on becoming DG in 2013, preempting the most troubling question of all about this scandal. Does the BBC need oversight to ensure corporate reputation doesn't come ahead of journalistic values?
Hello, I'm from the BBC. Can we ask some questions about the Dyson report, please?
One former BBC executive connected to the scandal did not come to her door today. Another has quit his post on the board of the broadcast regulator Ofcom. The government says the Bashir scandal is so serious it may require a look at how the BBC administers itself.
Government does have a responsibility to look very carefully to see whether the governance of the BBC does need reform in the light of these devastating findings.
The BBC values say this: trust is the foundation of the BBC. We are independent, impartial and honest. Without that trust, the corporation knows it's doomed.
And Mark joins me now. Mark, the Director General, Tim Davie, has emailed staff this evening saying this has been a difficult week as we report on the failings of some colleagues. How does the BBC emerge from this?
Well, it was all a long time ago, and almost everyone involved has since left the corporation. But I think there is frankly, a vital rebuilding job to be done on at least three fronts. First, the organisation needs to think about those people whose careers were blighted by this scandal. Whistleblowers like Matt Wiesler and Mark Killick in my report who feel they've been abandoned. And I think there may be questions about financial compensation. Secondly, BBC managers need to realise how difficult this is for BBC News journalists who do their best every day to uphold the values of the corporation. Many colleagues are despairing about what's gone on. They will need reassurance that the journalistic principles of the BBC are safe under the current management. And third, the BBC clearly needs to rebuild the trust of its audiences. Trust, they say, arrives on foot and leaves on horseback. This is going to take time, and there may be need for some kind of new oversight structure to restore confidence in the BBC as a beacon of journalistic integrity.
Mark, thank you. Our home editor, Mark Easton there. Just hours after a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas came into force this morning, there were clashes between Israeli police and Palestinians around the Al-Aqsa Mosque in the Old City of Jerusalem. Violence at the holy site was one of the flashpoints that led to the 11-day conflict, which has ended with both sides claiming victory. In Gaza, at least 243 people were killed, among them more than 100 women and children. 12 people were killed in Israel by rockets fired by Palestinian militants. Our Middle East editor Jeremy Bowen reports now from Gaza.
At 2 in the morning, the ceasefire started. In Gaza, time to celebrate survival and to swear allegiance to Jerusalem, the holy city only 60 miles away that most Gazans have never visited. Israel forbids it. We sacrificed everything for Jerusalem, he's saying. And in Jerusalem, Palestinians were up late too, delighted that Hamas declared they were fighting for Palestinian rights in the city. Israel says Jerusalem is the eternal capital of the Jewish people and will not be divided again. First light in Gaza was not a new start. The conflict with Israel runs deep, but no airstrikes and time to reflect. Men from Islamic Jihad, which fought alongside Hamas, had no regrets. They paraded in Khan Yunis, one of Gaza's towns, to bury 9 men from their unit. They were killed in a strike on a tunnel on the 4th day of bombing. Hamas thought the tunnels were safe. Locating and hitting them from the air was a significant achievement for Israel. Thousands came to honor the dead men. Here in Gaza, as well as in Israel, there is no sense that they've come to the end of their fight. The bodies could only be recovered after the ceasefire. They're digging for others. High morale here will infuriate Israeli nationalist politicians. One said Israel had surrendered to terrorism.
This is a huge demonstration of support for the armed wing of Hamas, the Qassam brigades. And they're sending a message as well that despite the hammering they've taken from the Israelis, that they're still here, they're still ready to fight, and they're talking as well about Jerusalem. That's been the theme of many of the chants here in the cemetery.
And in Jerusalem, more violence between Palestinian worshippers and Israeli police at the Al-Aqsa Mosque. The holy places in the city are charged with national as well as religious significance for Israelis and Palestinians. In Gaza, Hamas claimed victory, as Israel did too. The ceasefire stops the killing until the next time. It doesn't settle the conflict or even freeze it. But it has transformed Gaza's streets. The people are out of hiding. A day ago, going out could get you killed. Now, there's a chance to feel alive. Now, the Israelis are keeping a close eye on what's going on here. The whole time I've been standing here, I can hear a military drone in the air above, but I think they're pretty confident the ceasefire is going to hold. On the way down from Jerusalem, I could see them packing up their Iron Dome anti-missile system, at least from some of the batteries, and taking it away on a lorry. Now, southern Israel was absolutely paralyzed by the attacks, even though there was that big disparity in casualty levels. And here in Gaza, there's a lot of rebuilding to do. People have lost their homes. But as well as that, the militant groups will be rebuilding their smashed up positions, probably their tunnels, and most of all, their arsenals.
Jeremy, thank you. Jeremy Bowen there reporting in Gaza. The Health Secretary, Matt Hancock, has spoken of the pain and suffering of victims of the contaminated blood scandal, saying the government will pay compensation if that is what is recommended. He was facing questions at a public inquiry into what's been called the worst NHS treatment disaster. Around 3,000 people died after being given blood products containing HIV and hepatitis C in the 1970s and the 1980s. Here's our health editor, Hugh Pym.
I've now face the fact that I will never see him again on this earth. His last words were, and repeatedly, that those who did this must be brought to repent.
Sue remembers her husband Steve as she visits his grave in Devon. He was a haemophiliac who was treated by the NHS with contaminated blood products in the 1970s and 80s. He developed hepatitis C, a debilitating illness. It meant they couldn't have children. Steve died in 2018.
This is just wonderful. And it's a superb place to come and visit the grave, if visiting the grave is about spiritual refreshment and about just finding peace and being together.
Sue, like many others who were bereaved, wanted to hear from the Health Secretary today a firm commitment to financial compensation.
I'm hoping that he's going to actually apologise, to admit that there is now enough evidence for them to stop denying that proper compensation should be paid, and not as a financial gesture, but as a gesture of contrition.
She travelled to London to join others at the latest hearing of the public inquiry into what's been called the worst treatment disaster in the history of the NHS. Tens of thousands were infected by blood products carrying HIV and hepatitis C.
The whole truth. And nothing about...
Matt Hancock said he understood what families had endured.
I acknowledge the pain and the suffering, not only of the errors that led to this harm on people's lives, but also a sense that redress wasn't properly considered, and that people felt their voices weren't heard.
And then to the crucial issue of compensation.
I respect the process of the inquiry, and I will respect its recommendations. And should the inquiry's recommendations point to compensation, then of course we will pay compensation.
For Sue, that was significant, but she has reservations.
It's a huge move. But of course, if they actually decide to pay compensation, if they decide to hinge it on what the inquiry decides, that gives them another 2 years, 3 years, before they have to find a penny.
The inquiry will last for at least another year, so the long wait for official recognition of their losses will continue for a while yet. Hugh Pym, BBC News.
Spain says it'll officially lift restrictions for UK travellers from Monday, and people won't be required to take a PCR COVID test if they go. But Spain remains on the UK government's amber list, meaning that travellers will have to quarantine for up to 10 days when they come back. Our correspondent Guy Hedgecoe is in Madrid for us now. And Guy, where does this now leave things?
Well, Spain's Prime Minister Pedro Sánchez has spoken today about how important British tourism is for the country, the fact that it's the single biggest tourism market for Spain. And as a result, it has a tremendous importance for the economy overall. But of course, there is that issue of the fact that Spain is still on the amber list, the UK's amber list, and that's a deterrent to people to come over and visit. So Spain is desperate to be upgraded to the green list when the list is reviewed in a few weeks' time. But in the meantime, the Spanish government has been lobbying London to try and persuade the UK government to look slightly differently at Spain's situation, to look more closely at each region. For example, the Canary Islands and the Balearic Islands, which are both extremely popular tourism destinations normally, they have a much lower infection rate than many other areas of the country, certainly much lower than the Madrid region where I am now. And the argument there of the Spanish government is that these regions should be looked at more closely, and perhaps they could be given some kind of preferential treatment when the traffic light system is reviewed, to try and encourage people to go to those destinations.
Guy, thank you. Guy Hedgecoe reporting. Let's have a look now at the latest coronavirus figures, and they show that there were 2,829 new coronavirus infections recorded in the latest 24-hour period, and 9 deaths were reported. The total number of deaths across the UK is now 127,710. The latest 7-day average for the number of people admitted to hospital with coronavirus is 913. Turning now to the vaccinations programme, and more than 37.5 million people have now had their first COVID jab. That's more than 70% of the population. And more than 21.6 million people have had both doses, meaning that more than 40% of the population is now fully vaccinated. Glasgow is to remain under level 3 COVID restrictions for at least a further week amid concern over a rising number of cases. Scotland's First Minister Nicola Sturgeon did decide to ease restrictions in Moray, where the situation has improved significantly. Coronavirus surge testing is being extended across large parts of West and Northwest London, following a rise in cases of the so-called Indian variant. It comes alongside calls for people there to take the vaccination as soon as they're offered it. The testing will take place in Ealing, Hillingdon, Brent, Harrow and Hounslow. The International Trade Secretary, Liz Truss, is understood to have offered more concessions to her Australian counterpart today in an effort to agree a free trade deal by June. It would see both countries phasing out import taxes over 15 years. The Cabinet was reportedly split on what terms to propose, amid concerns that UK beef and lamb farmers could be undercut by larger Australian producers. Our global trade correspondent Darshini David reports.
British lamb may be on the menu this spring, but what of the future? When it comes to trade deals, both sides want the best cut for their country folk, be it choice, price or opportunities. But that means compromise. Farmers fear that it's agriculture that'll pay the price, with the removal of tariffs, import taxes and quotas on Australian products.
We have countries around the world that can produce beef and lamb cheaper than we can. Will it be as good a product? Possibly, possibly not. Will it be as healthy a product? Possibly, possibly not. But we don't know that. But it's going to mean that my bottom line vanishes.
Some British farmers fear that they'll struggle to compete with their Australian counterparts on cost. Farms here tend to be much smaller, some standards and rules are quite different. But economists say that given Australia is so far away, that relaxing tariffs might only increase the amount of goods coming in by the equivalent of 0.1% of our total imports. The real concern, they say, is that this could pave the way for greater access for farmers from even bigger producers, America or Brazil, in future trade talks. And that's why Australian farmers are keen to get more access now.
At the end of the day, it's not about displacing UK product. It's about making sure that we're one of the first countries that you look to when you don't have the supply locally.
You're about to sell out UK farmers? Back in Westminster, ministers gathered to argue the issues yesterday. With an urge to get the deal done fast, the Prime Minister indicated today that catering to Australia's demands would pay off.
We see a global future for this country. I do think that free trade deals present a fantastic opportunity for our farmers, for businesses of all kinds, for manufacturers.
But Edwin Poots, incoming leader of the DUP, is the latest politician to voice his concerns, as official calculations say Northern Ireland could be worse off. As it puts the latest proposals to Australia, the government says any deal will include safeguards and will be phased in over 15 years. But across the country, farmers worry their livelihoods could be compromised in the blueprint for global Britain's free trade future. Darshini David, BBC News.
Some of the world's biggest economic powers have raised their ambitions on tackling climate change. G7 environment ministers say they'll now aim to keep the rise in global temperatures to 1.5 Celsius, a much more demanding target than the 2 Celsius they're currently committed to. It'll mean they'll need to work much harder to cut emissions now rather than putting things off for the future. So what action will they take? Well, I'm joined in the studio by our Chief Environment Correspondent, Justin Rowlatt. Justin.
Thanks, Rita. This announcement represents an important increase in ambition, and not just for the countries that signed today's pledge. It's designed to send a signal across the world that tackling climate change is a top priority for these major economic powers, and it comes at a crucial time. The UK is due to host a landmark international climate conference in Glasgow in November. So here are the key commitments made today. First off, coal. India and many other developing countries receive subsidies for polluting coal plants from foreign donors, including Japan. Today, the environment ministers of the UK, the US, Canada, Japan, France, Italy and Germany said they will stop any new funding for coal-fired power stations in poorer countries by the end of the year. Now, that isn't a big move in itself, but they say they will eventually phase out such support for all fossil fuels. The ministers said they'd safeguard 30% of land for nature by 2030. The idea is to give space for wildlife and to help soak up carbon emissions. And they agreed much more cash is needed to build solar and other clean technologies in fast-growing economies like India and Indonesia. They restated a promise to provide $100 billion a year to help developing countries make the transition to low-carbon technologies. The meeting was hosted by the UK's Environment Minister, George Eustice.
We've been doing huge amounts of engagement with countries all around the world. We want all of them to raise their ambition in their nationally determined contributions to reducing climate change, getting their carbon emissions down. And we want all of them as well to do more to recognise the value and the importance of nature and the role that nature can play in tackling climate change.
Well, today, John Kerry, the US's climate envoy, called on the nations of the G20 to adopt the same commitments. Now, that would include China, the whole European Union and Russia. And that's the point. The G7 countries are some of the biggest economies, but if they can encourage the rest of the world to raise its carbon-cutting game in Glasgow in November, now that could be a game changer. Rita.
Justin, thank you. The broadcaster and University Challenge presenter Jeremy Paxman has revealed that he's been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease. The 71-year-old says he's receiving excellent treatment and that his symptoms are currently mild. He's planning to continue broadcasting and writing, he says, for as long as they'll have me. The kitsch and the camp of the Eurovision Song Contest returns tomorrow night after being cancelled last year because of the pandemic. Many of the singers have had to wait 2 years to perform, but COVID means it won't be quite the same. Well, Anna Holligan is on the red carpet in Rotterdam for us now. Anna.
And the arena is buzzing tonight. 3,500 fans are in here for the jury final ahead of the grand final tomorrow. Less than 24 hours to go. And then, of course, the public will have their chance to vote. But this is a Eurovision like no other, taking place in the context of a pandemic. But the artists are concentrating on what happens on that stage. Limbering up after a year in lockdown, for the chance to join an elite club. A victory at Eurovision will secure them not just a place in history, but the opportunity for their homeland to host next year's event.
My glorious outfit? Which glorious outfit? What are you talking about?
Yeah, I feel totally ready. So I'm just excited to get on the stage
I've been practicing in my hotel room loads, so I'm just ready to get on that stage and go for it.
How do you host the biggest singing contest on the planet during a pandemic? So testing plays a big part in this. Every 48 hours, this is where we come. Journalists, artists, crew, anyone working at Eurovision needs to make sure they haven't caught COVID. And audience too need a negative test along with their ticket to get inside. But despite this rigorous testing regime, there are still some concerns. And some of the local hospitals have warned if there's an emergency here, they won't necessarily be able to help because they're still so inundated with COVID patients.
Here are your hosts for this evening.
It's hoped the rules and protocols implemented here in Rotterdam could be used as a blueprint for the global revival of live events.
Now, especially, a lot of people are longing for normalness, the good old days, and I feel like our shows do give you a sense of that, and we do it under such strict regulations.
Which are what allow us to be here. So, who are the ones to watch in the final?
My top favorite is definitely France, a beautiful French chanson about stepping out of the shadows and into the light. My second is Italy. This is, a real rock vibe. It's all about being with people. It's edgy, it's dirty, but it's also classy and sophisticated. And my third favorite is probably Malta. This is very much about the power of saying no. It's about a woman who's in a bar, a man wants to buy her a drink, and she's like, no, thank you, I am not your honey.
COVID has made Eurovision's mission to bring people together complicated, but more coveted than ever. Anna Holligan, BBC News, Rotterdam.
That's it. Now on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Have a very good night. Bye-bye.